So, we're just going to go through an app tutorial. I'm just going to start by building an app completely from scratch. I haven't done really any prior planning for this app. We're going to just go through everything together, figure everything out, troubleshoot. Everything is going to be going on. Um, Alvin, if I say something wrong or, just I'm starting to mess up, just correct me at any point. So, or if you want to interject, just go for it. But yeah, so today this is kind of our schedule for today. We're going to start off with a brief introduction on what we're actually doing. I'm going to go through what the Pythagorean theorem actually is. You probably heard of it. And then these 4 steps are going to be our 4 phases of the design process. We're going to start by planning our app. Then we're going to go into the design phase, which is going to be the longest phase today. I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but it's going to take up most of our time today. We're going to go to the testing and feedback phase, where we're going to look over the app. We're going to go through what I made together, see what we could change and stuff like that. And then we're going to finish off with the conclusion, which is just going to be a quick survey on how I did. So let's start off with the introduction. What are we doing? Today we're going to be going through the app design process on code.org. All of this is going to be on code.org. We're going to be using block code, and we're going to be using their UI editor. You're going to be following me as I go through as I normally would and make the app completely from scratch. We're going to be designing the app today on a Sketchpad, and we're going to be doing some planning and seeing what we want to change and stuff like that. And this is an open session. I know it's just really you and me, but you can ask questions whenever, just stop me if I'm going too fast, if I'm not saying things properly, anything like that. Just go ahead and interject. If you have feedback, that's totally fine. And this app is going to be on the Pythagorean theorem. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, awesome. So the Pythagorean theorem, what does that mean? The Pythagorean what? So the Pythagorean theorem is really just a formula that describes the relationship between the hypotenuse and legs of a right triangle. In this case, this image does a really nice job of illustrating the case that a Pythagorean triangle needs to have a right angle in it somewhere. And the right angle in this case would be right here. The hypotenuse is this side C, and the sides A and B are the sides that surround the right triangle. And this is the equation that we use for it. Are you familiar with the Pythagorean theorem? Am I over-explaining it to you?
Somewhat.
Okay. Do you have any questions on what I just described? Do you want me to go a little bit more in depth on it?
Between the hypotenuse and these. No, go ahead and go on.
Okay, awesome. It'll start to make sense later on if it's a little bit unclear right now, but basically what we're going to do for this app is, given a side A and a side B that we're going to put into the app, it's going to give me a side C, and it's going to calculate that side C for us. So with any sides A and B, we can find out what the side C is. I'm guessing we're ready to start.
Yes.
So let's start. Our first phase is going to be the planning phase. So let's start planning it out. So what are we going to be doing here? And what we're really going to be doing is planning out the app that we want to design. And this is the most important step, because a lot of people tend to forget that the planning phase is one of the most important phases in the design process. A lot of people will just start and jump right into building their app. They're like, okay, let's start the code. Let's start doing all of this and that. But they have no idea what they want to do. They don't have a solid foundation of the app that they want to create. And what really happens is you get burnt out on the idea. You have no idea where you're going with it. And sometimes your project just fizzles out and doesn't work out, which is a really bad idea, which is why it's really important to come prepared to these types of things. Obviously,
Okay.
today we have a...
I have a question.
Go for it.
Why wasn't this one why wasn't this explained to us before they gave us the last unit 4?
Oh, I'm not
This should have
sure.
gone,
Yeah.
this should have gone first.
Yeah. This is not really in the code.org lesson plan that you're using that's actually on code.org. This is a process that I personally use, and it's been very
Huh?
successful for me in the past. You know, I use it in game design, I use it in app design, I use it for things that are outside of computer science, you know, like if I'm doing a
Okay,
school project or things like that. And I think a lot of people forget about the planning step of anything. It's really important to plan out what exactly you want to do, which is a great thing to cover. And I'm glad that you brought up that it wasn't really clear there, because a lot of people will probably start going into the app design without even knowing that they need to plan what they're doing and plan how they want their
I,
app to look
I,
and that kind of stuff. Mhm.
yeah, at the beginning of class, remember how they showed us all the, the paper and how to plan it? I had to
Yes.
actually do that in order to figure out what the heck I'm doing.
Yeah,
Okay, I
exactly.
even had, I had to even use the arrows, and then after that, then it came clear that, okay, this is how I'm supposed to do it. So that's how I did my planning.
Yeah. Yeah, and yes, in lesson 3, I believe there was a, or unit 3, there was a little picture of the rectangles, which were the screen, and it drew arrows to what the next screen should look like and all
Yes,
that kind of stuff. Exactly.
yes,
We'll be doing
I had
something
to go
similar
back
today.
to that.
Yeah. And we'll be doing something pretty similar today. You'll find that we won't be doing as many screens just because this project doesn't really require that many screens. But it
Okay,
it is definitely something that we'll be looking at today. We're gonna be doing something very similar on a sketchpad. Um, and yeah, so obviously I already have the app idea that we're gonna look at today, which is the Pythagorean theorem I explained earlier. But whenever you're designing an app, it's really important to explore a lot of concepts. You know, maybe you want to explore your interests, things that you find interesting, or things that you want to explore or assess the classroom value. I think this is a really important part, because a big part of this project that we want to do is create an app that you can use in your classroom to help your students with something. Obviously, this app is probably suited to a geometry teacher, you know, because it's more on the math side of things and would probably help some students who want to learn about the Pythagorean theorem more. And we really want your project to have some sort of classroom value. So whenever you're planning out what you want to work on for your classroom, just consider what your students could use in their class, you know. Um, and try something new. Maybe you have no idea what you want to do, but you see something that you've never heard of that you might think would be interesting. Maybe you want to create some kind of quiz. We saw a bird quiz earlier for one of the apps that was created. Maybe you want to quiz about something that's you're really passionate about and that's interesting to you. Maybe you want to create a game, you know, a game that people can play, something like that, you know? So the whole point is just consider multiple things. Don't be set on one full idea, because sometimes whenever you start to think about more and more ideas, you get ideas that probably would be better for you and you like more than the initial idea that you had. Okay. Um,
okay,
and so these are some questions to consider. I kind of just went over this on the previous slide, but uh, consider, what does this app require to work? What do I need to do to make this app work? Do I need a lot of slides? Do I need to do a lot of designing? Do I need to do some math? Do I need to do some research? How should this app look? What kind of things do I need to make this app look? Do I need images from online? Do I need to draw my own images? Do I need to design everything on code.org? And then finally, what group or demographic could use this app? You know, what kind of people would find this app helpful? What kind of people would use this app? Like I mentioned earlier, assess the classroom value. That's a really important part of the project. Maybe consider how your students could use this app. Maybe consider how your friends or your family could use this app. Maybe consider how you could use this app. You know, maybe you're creating something for yourself that could just help you in your own general daily use. But yeah, so before we get started on the designing, which is, like I mentioned earlier, is going to take most of the time today, do you have any questions?
No.
Awesome. So let's get right into designing our app. And here's what we're going to be doing. This is our longest phase, like I said earlier, and we're going to be using code.org, and we're going to be coding and designing. That's everything. All of that's going to happen in this phase. And before that, we need to do some planning. And the planning that I want to do for this is figure out what our app is going to look like. So let's check this out. This is a sketchpad. It's just called sketch.io. It's online. I'm just using it to draw. And what we're going to do is we're just going to draw out what our app is going to look like. And really quickly before I do that, this is the code.org main screen. And what I'm going to do for our project is I'm going to press create up here. And, you know, you don't have to follow along. Obviously, I'm going to be doing all of this on my own. If later on you wanted to just recreate the app or make some changes, I will post the app and there will be a video on this. So you can just look at that video and follow along if you want it to be at a different pace, if you want to take pauses and stuff like that. But for now, we're going to go ahead and press this create button, and I'm going to make an app on the App Lab. And now we're on the App Lab, and if you notice immediately, this is an untitled project. So something I'm going to do is rename this project to Pythagorean Theorem app and save it. It's always important to save your projects, and code.org will autosave for you, which is an awesome feature that they have. So you don't have to worry too much about losing any of your progress. But the main reason we created our app right now is so that we can kind of see the screen size that we're working with. This is obviously a 2D version of what looks to be a phone, but this general square is kind of the extents to which our app can be in. And notice I said square, it's really a rectangle. So let's go to the sketchpad now that we know our limits and kind of just draw a quick little rectangle here. Catherine, like you mentioned earlier, there was something similar to this. You know, we had all the arrows going to next slides and stuff like that. And that's kind of, like I mentioned, we're going to do something similar. And that's what we're going to be doing right now. So what do we want the app to look like? I'm going to just throw out some ideas here and let's just see how they look. First of all, we need it to have two inputs. We need it to have the input for A and the input for B, because if you recall right here, the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. And, you know, if we want to calculate C, we need an A and a B so that we can tell the person, whoever's playing our app, what the value for C is. So let's just say we want an A right here and a B right here. And maybe this is some sort of text box. And this is also some sort of text box where somebody could put in their numbers for A and B. Let's say they put in a 3 and a 4. You know, they could put in, maybe put in like a 12 and a 20. You know, it doesn't really matter what they put in. It just matters that we have an input for that so that we can keep that and we can use it to calculate our C value. This is like the most important part of the project, because other than that, everything else only other thing we need is to tell them what the C value is. The C value just doesn't appear out of nowhere. They need to see it somewhere on the screen. So maybe we have a box up here, and this is where the C value is. And maybe we have a little text thing right here that says, please enter values for A and B. Something like this, you know, and maybe Just move it down a bit. And then maybe we come up here and say, this is our C value. So now if someone, our goal is if somebody was going to put a value for A and a value for B, it's going to calculate something. It's going to come over here and it's going to do some calculation. It's going to call this calculation. And then that number, whatever number we get, is going to come over here and show the person what it is. And it's just going to place it right there. And, I'm not getting too deep into the technicals of this because I just want to describe what we actually want to happen. And this is kind of just the logic process of what we actually want to happen. This looks like a pretty solid app design so far. Do you guys have anything to add? Anything you want to change? Maybe in terms of color or things like that?
No.
Okay, awesome. In that case, I'm just gonna, I think what we can do is, this is a bit longer than I drew it as, so we should have a little bit more space here. And, to help somebody who doesn't know what the Pythagorean theorem is, maybe we should have a screen that tells them what the Pythagorean theorem is. So maybe we have a button here. And this button is going to take them to a different screen. And this different screen is not going to have any of this stuff on it, but maybe it has some text on it. And maybe that text simply says, the Pythagorean theorem is blah, blah, blah. Just to explain to them what the Pythagorean theorem actually is, in case they have no idea what I'm talking about. We want them to have some kind of background on the app and make sure that it makes sense to them. And maybe we have an image right below this. I know there's a little bit more space here technically, and maybe this image is just a picture of the triangle from earlier. We can put this picture in that I showed you earlier. We could put a different kind of picture in, but we really just want to explain to them that this is C, this is our right angle, this is A, and this is B. And we could put that picture in right below this. Okay. Now there's one problem with this app. Do you know what it is? Okay, that's
The
okay.
calculation?
No, good thought though. We should get to that. We will get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But the problem is right here. When we press this button, it's going to send us to this different screen. But how do we get back?
Oh, you need a button to go back.
Exactly, right. So we're going to need some kind of button right up here for us to get back. And when you press this button, it's going to take us right back to this frame here. Technically, this is not even an arrow. This is just a starting point. Because really, we need to be able to have a button that takes us here and a button that takes us back. Otherwise, we're going to press this button and we're just going to be stuck on this slide. And that's not really helpful for someone who actually wants to use this. Okay, now kind of the tough part of this, and that's the calculation. And the truth is, there's a really simple way to calculate C, knowing A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And that's just taking the square root of both sides. And really, we can calculate our value for C if we have the square root of this here. So maybe I want to just do this. There we go. You don't have to worry about any of this. But this is how we calculate our C. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a function for C. And we're going to go into what functions are when we start coding in a few minutes. But really, before we start coding, we're going to start the design process. And oh, Mr. Malari, actually, I didn't even notice you were here. You pointed out what the simplification for C was. So thank you for that. Anyway, this is pretty much what we're going to be doing. And we're going to write a function for this calculation. And it's going to take our value for A and our value for B. It's going to come here. It's going to do our little calculation in our calculation bubble, which is really just this. It's going to give us a value. It's going to put that value here for C. And now immediately, I'm noticing one other problem. And that problem is we need to tell the app when to calculate. The app is not smart. The app is as smart as we tell it to be. And the truth is, it's not going to know when we want our value for C. Maybe we're just playing around and putting random stuff in here and we're just playing with big numbers. We don't want it to accidentally calculate something and maybe accidentally put an error out that it's not going to work. So down here, maybe we could have a button that's calculate. And maybe this calculation button is going to come straight up here and it's going to conduct our calculation. And it's going to get our value from A and our value for B to calculate. And this looks like pretty much all we need. So a quick overview. We have our A text box and our B text box. Inside of our A text box, we can put a number in. So we could put a number like 34 and we could put a number like 43 here, something like that. Then we have our calculate here. This is our calculate button. Once we press our calculate button, it's going to go, it's going to get our value for A, it's going to get our value for B, and it's going to go to our little calculation bubble right here. And this bubble, what this is really doing is it's going to do this formula. It's going to take our value for A and square it, plus our value for B and square it, and then it's going to take the square root of that whole thing, which you'll find soon. We can do all of that inside of code.org. It's going to take that value, and then it's going to put it right here. Then the other thing we created was our button here. Let's call this button our help button. Help. Now, when someone clicks the help button, it's going to come all the way down here and it's going to go to this different slide that we created. And it's going to tell us what the Pythagorean theorem is. And it's going to have a picture for us to visualize that. And then we're going to have a button up here in the top right. And that button is going to go back to the main page. So this is pretty much our design. And we're going to reference this design when we start designing the app from scratch. Awesome. So let's get back to where we were. So do you have any questions as to what I've done so far?
No, not right now.
Okay, awesome. Just remember that since we just started planning, we still have a lot more to do. So just interject me if I'm going too fast at any point. And after we finish our actual design portion, we'll take a quick break. Okay, now we're back here on the App Lab, and we're going to start designing our app. And if you notice up here, there's 3 little tabs: code, design, and data. We don't need to worry about the data tab. That's something that some people may mess with later if they want to store things, and it's too complicated right now. But really the 2 main focuses we have are the code and design tabs. And we're going to start with the design tab. Okay, so we're on the design tab right now. And if you notice right here, it tells us what screen we're on. We're on screen 1. Screen 1 is going to be our main screen, but instead of calling it screen 1, let's call it main. And if you notice when I'm typing right here, it's also changing right here. I was to just put a bunch of characters like that, it would update. But we're going to call this our main, because this is our main screen, and this is where all the math is going to happen. And this is where the person, like we mentioned here, is going to be able to put in their values for A and B and do the calculation and get the value for C. Now, let's start designing based on what we created here. Obviously, we started off by saying we need two text boxes, one for A and one for B. And the way we're going to get that is for a text input. And if you notice right here, it says drag the elements into your app. All we're going to do is take this text input, we're going to click it and drag it all the way here. Boom. Now we have a text input. And this text input, what we're going to be able to do is type in this text input later. If you notice when I press run here, I can put letters into this text input and numbers. Now back to the design tab. I'm switching between code and design often, but you don't really need to because we're just focusing on the design portion. Notice that this also has an ID, and the ID is the way for us to recognize it as its name essentially. And this is how we're going to refer to it across the app whenever we're coding with it and things like that. And right now its ID is text underscore input 1, but that doesn't really help us because based on our design, this should be the input for A, the value for A. So let's rename it to something that actually makes sense. Let's call it input underscore A. I think that makes sense. So the input for the variable A. Awesome. Now let's do this one more time. Let's take this text input. We're going to click and drag it all the way down here. We're going to line it up. Notice there's this line here that tells you if it's lined up. We're going to do our best to line it up. And we're going to just throw it right here. And let's go ahead and move this down a bit too. Awesome. And if you notice, when I click between these two, or when I hover over these two, it says the ID right next to the mouse. ID input A, ID text input 2. Well, we just created a new text input, but we still have to change the ID of it. So we're going to come here and we're going to change the ID to the other letter that we had, which is B. Notice how we have the A here and the B here. So we're just going to do that. And we're going to call it input underscore B. Awesome. So if we come here and hover over these two, we've got the input A and the input B. And these are going to be our two inputs where we're going to keep our letters. And then we're going to ask the player to put their letters in. But there's one problem right now. When I press run, do you notice what the problem is?
It's empty.
Right. And we don't know which one is which. If you notice when I'm the player and I hover over it, I don't see which one is input A and input B. The ID is for the person creating the app, but we need to be able to tell the person using the app that which one is which. And from our design, we know the top one is our A and the bottom one is our B. And we have a little letter next to it to let the player know that. So what we can do is we're going to get this ABC label right here. We're going to click and drag it just like the other one, and it's going to create a text label for us. And we can come in here, come all the way over here, and notice, again, it has a label. We need to, or it has an ID. We need to change the ID to something that makes sense to us, not label 1. Label 1 doesn't mean anything to me. Notice how we titled this ID input A for this top text box here. But what we should do is title this text text A, just so we know what it is. So when we hover over it, it says text A, and this one is input A. So now we know which one is which. And what we can do is right under the ID, there's another property called text. And the text property is in its name telling you what the text is going to say. So if you watch down here, while I edit the text up here, it's going to update. So now I can set the text to A. And obviously there's a lot of other properties here. If you want to change the color, you can click this one and notice how it's kind of changing the color there. Maybe I want to set the color to a purple. Maybe there's a font size here. Maybe I want to increase the font size. I can press this arrow here to increase the font size so you can see it better. There's a font family. These are all the fonts that there are. Maybe I want to get the font as Georgia. There's a lot of options here. But for now, oh, let's fix that. But for now, let's just revert it back to what it actually was before, which was this, not impact, not comic. Oh, it was Arial Black. This, and we'll keep the font size. We can mess with the color and things later. They're not entirely important. But if you notice right now, it's not really right next to this text label. And we want it to be next to it because we want it to be clear that what the A is for is this and not the one below it. So what we can do is we can click and drag this to move this around. Even though we already inserted it in here, we can just click and drag and move that around. Awesome. Now, we need to make another one for B, obviously, right? We still need to let them know that the bottom one is B because they might not know what it is. They might think it's C. But if you notice, if I'm going to drag another label, I click and drag, it's going to be back to its basic value. It's going to have an old ID. It's going to have this text. It's going to have a different color that we want. It's going to have a different font size that we want. Maybe it has the different font family, and that's because it's choosing from the default values. Now, we don't want to go through the process of making a completely another label again, because that can be tedious. So we're going to delete this, because if you notice right here, if I click on this A, there's a duplicate button. So if we go ahead and press duplicate, we just created another label, and it has the exact same properties as this. Now it has a different ID. If you notice, this top one has an ID of text_A, but this bottom one still has the ID of label 3. And like always, we need to change the ID to something that makes sense to us. And what makes sense to us is this being text_B, because this is the text for B. And obviously, these are still A still, so we're going to have to change the text of this bottom one to B. And if we do some moving around here, now we have the A and the B perfectly right next to the frame that we want it to be. We have input A, we have ID text A, we have input B, and text B. Awesome. Now, let's see what else we need to do. Oh yeah, we need our calculate button. So let's get our calculate button in. And if you notice, we're running a little low on space down here. So we might have to move some things up. And one thing we can do is we can, oh, maybe it's not working. That's fine. One thing we can actually just do is click each frame and change the height here if we want. Or we can just click each frame and drag it up manually like this. So maybe we want to just drag it up to here, so we have some extra space for our calculate button. Awesome. Now we're going to put our big calculate button here. Now, the thing with the calculate button is it's a button. It's not a label, and it's not a text input, because we don't want them to put input as calculate, and a text label, you can't press the text label. A text label is just there to have some text in case you want to describe something, like we're describing these inputs. So what we can do is here we have an element called button, and we can drag this element down here, right here. And now we have a button. And again, this ID is called button1, but really we need to call it something that makes sense to us. And if we know from here, this button is our calculate button. So what we're going to do is just call the ID for this calculate. And it still says button, but if we come here to the text, we can change the text to calculate. And it changes the calculate, or changes the text to calculate right here. Now this is a pretty small button and we kind of want this button to be a little bit bigger. So one thing we can do is down here, if we put our mouse on the corner right here, we can drag this button and then move it. Now we have a pretty big calculate button. Maybe you want to make it a little smaller here. Move it around. There we go. There. That looks good. And maybe we want to change the color of this calculate button because maybe you don't like the color orange. So why don't you just throw out a random color as to what we should change the calculate button to?
Blue.
Awesome. Let's change it to blue. So if you notice here, if we code through these properties, there's two properties for color. There's text color and background color. And if you're confused at first, don't worry because it's labeled appropriately. Our text color is the color of our text. And if you notice right now it's white and the text is white. Our background color is the background color of the button. Right now it's orange here and this is orange. So we said blue, so let's click the background color because we want to change that. And we can go ahead and drag this all the way to blue. And if you notice here, it's going to change our color to blue, just like that. Awesome. And maybe this calculate text needs to be a little bit bigger, so we can just press up on our font size. And we have a calculate text now, and it's much bigger. And we can see it. Awesome. I think we have everything we need on this bottom side. We have our calculate, our input A, our input B, and our text A and our text B. Awesome. Let's go back to our sketchpad. What do we need to make next? Okay. So we have a few more things to make next. We have to have our C value. We need to have our help button. And then we need to have our please enter values for A and B. This is just a text that we wanted to create to let them know what to do. So since it's just text, we're going to use our text label here. This label, we're going to drag it. And again, we're going to realize that this doesn't have any of the properties that we wanted from this. And once we realize that, just like I just did, we're going to delete it. Come back here to text A. And when we click it, it's going to pull up all the stuff about text A. And we're going to just duplicate it. And now we have all the stuff that text A has. And we can rename this to instruction. Because what we're going to give the text for this, if we go back to our sketchpad, is please enter values for A and B. Please enter values for A and B. And if you come over here, you notice that we can only see a P and we can see a little glimpse of the L. And that's because the L is being cut to the next line because this text label is not big enough for this. So what we need to do is make this bigger, and we can do that by taking this dragger and drag it just like you did with the other ones. And there we go. And maybe we want to move this up here by dragging it, and then drag this. And that's that. And let's just make this a bit smaller actually. Right there. Now, it looks a bit weird right now because everything is centered to the left. What if we wanted the text to be centered to the center instead of the left, like it is right now? Well, we can change that because there's a property called text alignment. And this text alignment property is really nice because if you've ever worked with Google Docs and you've changed your text alignment to center, to right, to things like that, you know what this is going to do. And if we want to change it to the center, it's going to go ahead and center our text for us. That looks a lot better. I think that makes perfect sense. Now, it's a bit bland because it's the same font as this. So let's change the font maybe, just for fun. Someone throw out a font that we should change it to, any font.
comic.
Sure, let's just do comic. It looks a bit different, but that's okay because we want some variety for our app. We want it to be interesting. So let's just drag this down here a little bit. Awesome. So if we run it, this is what whoever is going to play with our app is going to see. They're going to see the A, they can put the value in for A, the B, value in for B, and they can press calculate. But nothing's going to happen when you press calculate because we haven't worked on that feature yet. So let's go back to the design and let's check out our sketchpad one more time. And if we look at our sketchpad now, we have two more things we need to create on this slide. And those things are the help button and our C output. So let's go back to the app and let's do our C output first. And since it's just an output, we only really need a text. But instead of just using a label like we use here, let's use text area. And let me just make sure. Oh, never mind. Okay. I may have lied. We're going to go back to text label. Never mind there. And what we're creating is our C output right here. And we want it to just display the value for C. So let's make this text as this. And we can copy our C from here for the C. So let's make this a bit bigger like we did before. Let's call this our output underscore C. If you notice down here, we called this input A, input B. Input meaning we're going to take in the information. And then we're going to call this output C, meaning we're going to put out the information, the result. And this text is just going to be called output C. And for now, this text is not going to have anything because we're going to change the value when we get to the coding part, whenever they press the calculate button. But let's just put the text for now as placeholder, just so we can see what it looks like. And what we can do is we can change the text alignment again to center. We can increase our font size to something like 30. Oh, that's too big. Well, actually, I don't think it'll matter because our text won't be this long. So let's just delete some of that. And then we can change our font. We did comic last time, so maybe we'll do Georgia. Our text color is gray. Maybe we want some variety here. Let's pick something readable like that. Sure, why not? And that looks good. And this is really just a placeholder, but for now, I'll just the number 0 here. Awesome. But when we go to run, we still don't know what this 0 is. And really, it's our C value. So what we can do, just like I did with the A and the B, is come here, click the A. We're on text A. Duplicate this, move it up here. And then obviously we got to rename it. We called this one text A, this one text B. So let's just be consistent and call it text underscore C. And we'll change the text to C. Awesome. And whenever they press calculate, this value should change to whatever the actual value is. Maybe it's 100 or something like that. We get the idea. And let's move this to the left a bit so that it's aligned with the one down there. Awesome. Now, sometimes maybe you're going to be editing your app and you're wondering if these are actually aligned. Because when you press run, maybe it's hard to tell if they are perfectly aligned. And maybe you want them to be perfectly aligned just so it looks great. Something you can do is just go ahead and press this text label and check out the X position. This is the position of the label on the screen. If you notice while I was hovering around, you can kind of see the X and the Y position. And if I go to this top left corner here, 0, 0 is at the top left corner of this position of the app screen. And as I move to the right, the X is going to increase And as I move down, the y is going to increase. So if I come all the way down here, we can see the dimensions of the screen at the very corner. It's about 320 for the x and 450 for the y. That's all that means. And each element, which these are all elements that I click on, has a width, height, x position, and y position. And this x position and y position is at the top left corner of the button. Just like this is at the top left corner of the screen for 0, 0, the x and y is at the top left corner of the button. So if you notice, the x position is 75 for the calculate button or on calculate, and 380 for the y. And if you go to the button, the top left, it's about 75 and 380. So that's a good way to kind of see the position. And if we were to play with this number, like if we wanted to move this calculate button up a bit, we could change the 380 to a 390. Notice how it's moving down, because as we increase the y, it's going to go down. Or we want to move it up from 380 to 370. That's how we would move it up. And a good way to see if things are on the same level is if we click on B, we can see that its x position is 5. And if you click on A, we can see that the x position is also 5, which tells me that the top left corner of both of them are on the same x position, so they're probably aligned. And if we come up here to C, the x position is also 5. The y position, however, is different from all of these, and it's increasing from C to A to B. And that's just to tell us that as we move down, the y position increases. That's just something small that might help you when you're designing your app. Okay, so let's go back to the Sketchpad.
Quick interruption here, Sid. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no worries.
We're going to have a few new teachers coming in because they finished their work in the other breakout rooms. My advice to all the new people is to just follow along with Sid. He's kind of explaining app start to finish. But then if we have time after he's done with this session, for those who missed the earlier part, maybe Sid, you can just kind of go over some of the things they might have missed.
Yeah, no problem. And what I can do really quickly is give a brief overview of what we did over the last 30 minutes. And to those of you just joining, welcome. And something we are doing is designing an app. And if I go to the table of contents here, you're going to notice that I gave an introduction and I mentioned what the Pythagorean theorem is. And really quickly, to those of you that are new, the Pythagorean theorem describes the relationship between a hypotenuse and legs of a right triangle. And if you notice here, in this example, C is the hypotenuse and A and B are the legs of the right triangle. And the right triangle really means that there's a 90-degree angle right here between A and B. And this is the equation that we use to describe the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. And what we want to do is make an app that can take a value for A and a value for B and give us a value for C. And what we started to do is we drew out what our app was going to look like. We have our value for A, our value for B, our calculate button. This calculate button is going to come up here. It's going to take our value for A, our value for B. It's going to run this calculation, which we derived. And then it's going to put that value back up here. But in case somebody doesn't know too much about the Pythagorean theorem, we're going to make a screen, a help button, to tell them what it does. And that help button is going to go to this different screen, and it's going to explain what the Pythagorean theorem is. And it's going to have a picture here to show what it is. And then it's going to have a button that sends us right back to the screen. And that's what we've designed on our Sketchpad. But what we're working on right now is bringing that Sketchpad to life here. If you notice, we kind of have our labels already. We have our text here. We have our A and our B, our calculate, all of those kinds of things. So hopefully catches you up a little bit on what we're doing right now. Does anyone have any questions? New, old, anyone? Awesome. Then let's just keep going. And right now, we just finished our C element right here. And, I don't like this font. So I'm just going to actually go back and change this to comic that we chose earlier. Looks a bit better. And we're going to go back to our sketchpad to see what we have to do next. And what we have to do next is make this help button. That's the last thing we have left on our main screen. And this is our main screen. So let's go back. And we need to make a help button. So let's get a button, drag and drop. And let's just call it help. We're going to go with the ID. We have to change the ID of everything. We need to make it something that we can understand. So let's just call it help. And the ID is how we reference this and how we're going to be able to call it in our code. Now, the text for it, we need to change our text because right now it just says button. And anybody who's looking at this is going to be confused, like, what does it mean? So we're going to change our text to help. Awesome. And maybe this help button needs a different color than orange. Does anyone have a suggestion for what the background color of this button could be? Anyone, any color?
Blue.
Red.
Okay. Well, I know blue and red makes purple, so why don't we compromise and just choose purple? Awesome. Now we have our help button, and let's just stick our help button right in the middle here. Right there. Awesome. So this is our help button. And what we want it to do is when we press this help button, it's going to send us to our other screen. And our other screen is going to describe what the Pythagorean theorem is. So we need to make another screen for this because we ran out of room here. And this help button is supposed to send us to another screen. And if you notice up here, I mentioned that this is our main screen. And it says main right here because we called it main. We changed the ID of the screen to main earlier, right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to press this drop down, and we don't have any other screens. So we can press new screen. Boom, we've got a new screen. And let's just call this screen help screen. And lastly, let's go back for a second. Notice I tried to change the screen ID to help. And the truth is, the reason we can't change the screen ID to help is because on main, we already have something called help. It's called the button. So we need to change, we need to call this help something else. Now, code.org is trying to help us and they put an underscore in front of it, but that's a little bit confusing unless we just do help underscore screen. Now we have our main screen and our help screen, which we can switch back between really easily, but the player can't do that. We need to make a button to help them do that. So let's go back to our help screen. And what do we need on our help screen? Let's go to our sketchpad. And what we need is a description on what the Pythagorean theorem is. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a text label here. We're going to drag this text here. We're going to call this text, or we're going to change the ID of this text first, information, because it's going to tell us information about the Pythagorean theorem. And we're just going to call it, or we're going to give the text for it, the description of the Pythagorean theorem. And the description we can use is right here on the slideshow. And it says describes the relationship between hypotenuse and legs of right triangle. So if I was to just come here and just copy this, I can come here into the text, delete it, and paste that in. And right now we got the text right here. Now we have a lot of space on the screen, and from this, we don't have a lot to write on it. So let's make this way bigger. And we're on the properties. And if we scroll down a bit, we have our font size. We can change that to 30. And now it's much bigger. And we can change our text alignment to center. And we can change our text color to something dark. so it's easy to read. And then maybe we're going to change our text right here to the Pythagorean theorem describes. Awesome. And notice how it's cutting off on the bottom here again. We had this issue earlier. All you have to do is come down here and drag this down a bit more. And if we run out of space, we click and drag this up. And then drag this down. Perfect. And we can drag this down a bit more so we don't have to use up too much space. Awesome. So that's the text we want. We have a few more things to do. We want to get a picture here. And we also need to get an exit button. Now, if you notice, we're going to start with the picture. Out of all of the elements that we have an option called image. And the image is how we're going to be able to put pictures outside of code.org in, because we don't want to draw something with all of this stuff. We want to be able to use an image that's outside of code.org. So it's really easy. And what we can do is drag and drop this image. And if we size this up, we have an image now. And we're going to call this image triangle. And it's going to be the picture of the triangle. And that's the ID of the image, so we can reference it if we want to. Notice down here, there's something called image. And this is how we're going to be able to choose our image. Oh, right now, the image, the triangle doesn't have an image, which is why we don't see anything. But if we were to choose an image, we could do that. But here's the problem. We don't have any files uploaded. And there are tons of icons here if you do choose to use one of these icons. But we don't have any files uploaded here. We can skip this option because this option is a little bit more work than we need to do, because we have this option here called link to image. And we don't have to download our file, but okay. Let's see if this works. But we're gonna find a picture of our Pythagorean theorem triangle from online. So let's just go Pythagorean theorem triangle. Search it up. Let's go to images. And any of these would work, really. But let's choose one that makes sense. I think this one makes a lot of sense because it tells us what a squared plus b squared is, and it has the triangle labeled for us. And if I open image in a new tab, notice here we got a link to this image, which is in a new tab, and it's got this .png at the end. And this .png is really important. So let's copy this link and let's go back to the code.org. And notice how it tells us that this only works for URLs that end with .gif, .png, or .jpg. So we know we got an image that's .png. And you have to be really careful if you use this method, because you need to make sure that the image that you choose actually has a .png at the end. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So if you're going to put the image URL here, paste it, and then we press submit. Notice here we got the image here. That's cool. Now we have the image of our triangle, we have our text, and the only thing we need next is, I'm going to get rid of this, is our back button. Notice how we are kind of running a little bit low on space. So we're going to make this text a bit smaller. So let's just come back to this element by clicking on it, scroll down, go to font size, and then decrease the font size a bit. And then let me see if I can, there we go. We're going to make this a bit smaller and drag this down to about here. And then we can drag the picture down to about here. We can make our picture a bit bigger, like so. Awesome. This looks pretty good. Now we can get our back button, because if you notice, we don't have a way to get back to the main screen. On the main screen, we have our help button right here, and that help button is going to take us to the help screen. But we need a button to get back to the main screen. So we're going to grab this button element, drag and drop it right here. And we're gonna change the ID of this. We have to change the ID of everything so you know what it means. And you need to name it something that makes sense to you, like we've been saying. And let's just call it back because it's gonna go back to the main screen. The other button is called help, just for reference. Awesome. So we're on the back button. Now, just as always, we need to change the text to something that makes sense to us. We're gonna change it to back. And again, anybody have a color that we want to use for the back button? Any color.
Orange.
Okay, maybe we'll just make it a little bit darker then, I guess.
No, I'm changing my mind. How about like neon light blue or something?
Oh. Let's try that. I don't think that's gonna work. Oh, there we go. I got it to work. I think that's as good as it's gonna get. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's our back button. And if we go back here, I don't think we have anything else we need. We have on our help screen, we have our back button, we have our text, and we have our image that we wanted to do. And if we go back to our main screen, we have all of the things that we need right here. So we pretty much finished the design process. And now we just have to code this app. And before we get into coding this app, we're just going to take a quick 3-minute break for you guys to get collected. And some of us have been here for a little while, so we're just going to take a few minutes before we get into the coding part. So yeah, before we do that, awesome, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to pick up right where we left off. And can you guys all see my screen okay? Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. And let's just go back to this. For the most part, we're not going to be using our Sketchpad anymore because we're going to be focused on the coding part. And we're going to do all of that coding on the App Lab. But we will come back to it just to refer. And we're going to start off on the main screen. And if you notice up here, we were on our design tab. And if we want to switch to the coding part, we can switch to the code tab. And there is a data tab. I mentioned this earlier. You don't really have to worry about it right now. And now we're on the code screen. But if you notice, we're on the text portion. You can actually switch between text and blocks. And for now, we're going to stay on the blocks. So in case you start on text, just come up here and press show blocks. And now we're in the block setup, and you can tell there's a little indent here, and that's how we're going to be placing our blocks. Now, here's a few things we need to create. And, you know, it was mentioned earlier, where are we going to do this calculation? Is this going to be on another screen? Are we going to have to do this calculation? And the answer is no. And we are going to be able to write a function that does this calculation for us. And right here, you notice a little button called functions. So if we click this, we're on the functions tab. And these are functions that we can use. And functions are really helpful because it's a really easy way to organize our code. We're going to be practicing some important organization ideas today. And functions are a really important part of that. Also important is comments. If you notice, hovering over these code snippets, it tells us what the description of the item is. And it tells me the name here. It says comment, write a description of some code. And it was mentioned a little while ago, like 2 sessions ago, about organization. And comments are a really important way to organize your code, because on the off case that you take a break from your code and come back after a while, you'll have no idea what that code is telling you to do. And comments are an easy way for you to leave a note to yourself as to what this code actually does. So we're going to use comments to plan out our code. So let's take a comment, click and drag just like you did with the design. We're going to drag it right here. And if you notice, we can add some text to this comment. And the thing we want to write is a calculate function. And I'm going to write, and what we're going to do is we're just going to take this function and we're going to drag this one. The reason we're not dragging this function is because this function doesn't have any parameters, and we want to give the function some parameters. And we're going to go into what the parameters are in a little bit, but we're going to click and drag just like you did with the comment and place it right under the comment. And actually what we'll do is we're going to put the comment inside the function, so we know what the comment is referring to. Now, in the comment, we're going to tell what this function is going to do. So we're just going to say this function is going to calculate the third or the hypotenuse of the right triangle. And maybe we don't want to go too far to the right, so we can add another comment here. Given values A and given parameters A and B. And the parameters are really going to be what we can give to this function in order for it to calculate properly. And if you notice right now, the parameter of this function is n, and the name of this function is my function. We're going to obviously rename this function to something that makes sense to us. We're going to call it calculate, because this is going to be our calculate function. And we're going to change n to a. And if you notice, we need another parameter for b. And we can do that by just pressing this arrow right here. And it just created another spot for us. And we can put b in. And this function is going to take a and b when we give it a and b, and it's going to give us the value for c. And quickly back to the sketchpad, this is how we calculate our value for c given a and b. Now what we can do is we can start doing some math. So if we click the math here, notice there's all these different types of operations that we can do. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. And there's a few different operations we need to do, and we're going to take it step by step. And the first operation that we need to do is a squared. And we also need to do b squared. So what we can do is come here, and this variables tab is how we're going to start defining our variables. And we want to define a variable called a squared, so it's easy for us to know what it is. So let's just drag this var x is equal to, and we're going to call it a squared. And we're going to define this variable a squared as a squared. We know that a is going to be a number, so we're going to define it as a squared. And the way to do squared is actually, the best way is to use this math.pow, and this means power. And if I was to drag this right here and put it where it says equals, notice there's yellow there telling me it's going to drop right in there. This math.pow is going to take a number x, notice down here, it gives me a description. It's going to take this number x to the power of y. And since it's xy, if I set the y to 2, it's going to take whatever number I put in to the power of 2, which means it's going to square it. So if I put a in, a squared is a to the power of 2, which is a squared. Awesome. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for b squared. Variable, I'm going to call it b squared. We're going to go to math.pow, b squared, and we have b squared. Finally, we need to calculate the square root, and we need to add these two values together. And we can do that in one fell swoop. But something to note, when you calculate these values, it's going to calculate, but it's not going to give you a value. You need to return that value in a function. So we're going to use this. If you notice, the description for return is return a value from a function. And for now, I'm going to leave this value out. And I'm going to show you what happens when you don't do return. And right now we're going to define another variable called result. And this result is going to be the square root of a squared plus b squared. And if you notice down here, there is something called square root. And if we take this and drag it, you can put it right here. The result is the square root of, and then a squared plus b squared. And the first thing we need to do is we need to put an addition operator here. We can take and drag this. And then we need to put this a squared variable here and the b squared variable here. And if I'm not mistaken, and I shouldn't be, we can just type it in here. Hopefully that works. So I'm going to copy this. And notice how I'm hovering over these errors. These little triangle things are errors, and they're just telling me what's wrong with my code. And if I hover over this one, it says calculate is defined, but it's not called in your program. And that's just to tell you that you made a function, but you're not using it. And this one says result is defined, but it's not called in your program. We have our results, but it's not going anywhere. This is the answer. I mean, this is the square root of a squared plus b squared, but you know that that's c. We have our value for c. The result is c. So what would happen if I were to print this function? What I can do is come here and press console.log and throw it right under the function. And I can take this and put it right here. I can put calculate right here. I can put A as 3 and B as 4. And if you know anything, 3, 4, 5 is a Pythagorean identity. So what's going to happen is it's going to give you a value of 5 if you calculate it properly. But when we run the app, it's going to give me a value of undefined. And the reason is because we didn't return anything. We need to return something in order for a function to work. We need to return the result, because when you call a function, you need to give something back, and what we're giving back is our result. So we're going to go here, drag return, and we're going to give the variable result. It's going to return result, and result is the square root of a squared plus b squared. A squared is a squared, b squared is b squared. Now when we log this, we're going to get the value 5 down here, which is awesome because our code worked. So the Pythagorean theorem is now going to work. We can get rid of this. Awesome. Now we need to finish the most important part of this app, and that is being able to take text from A, text from B when you press calculate. So let's go to UI controls, because what we need to do is when you press calculate, notice on our sketchpad, we have it. When you press the button calculate, it's going to come here. It's going to take our value for A, take our value for B, and it's going to run our calculation. We wrote our calculation. We have the ability to give our function the value for A and the value for B, and we're going to get the value for C. But we don't have the ability to press the button and get something in response. So we're going to have to do a UI control. And if you notice, there's a lot of UI controls here. And let's see if I can find the one that we're looking for. Oh, there, it's right here. Oh, wait. Actually, sorry, it's this one. So this ID right here is on event. And on event, if you notice on the description, it says executes the callback code when a specific event type occurs for the specified UI element ID. Okay, that's a lot. Basically, all it's saying is when I drag this here, for an event, and our event, we have all these options for events, and these are IDs. And if you remember from earlier, we titled all of the different things, different IDs. If you notice here, we have the input A, the input B. This is the input A, and this is the input B. We have our output C, we have our text A, our text B, our text C, we have our triangle, all the things that we named today. But what we want is calculate, because we want this event to run when the calculate button is pressed. So on the event calculate, when it's clicked, none of this, we don't need to worry about a mouse out, a mouse move. These are all options that you could explore when you're making your own app. But right now, all we care about is when the calculate button is clicked, and it's going to run this function. Now, this function doesn't really need any parameters, obviously, but what we're going to do is we're going to come back to our sketchpad and notice that when we press calculate, what's supposed to happen is we're going to come down here, we're going to get our value for A, get our value for B, we're going to run the calculation, and we're going to put it here. So obviously, when you press calculate, something's going to happen, but it's not going to get our value from A unless we tell it to get our value from A. Now, what we can do is come here, and there's a thing that says get number. And oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh, right. Okay, sorry. So we're going to define a variable here. We're going to call this variable A, because like I mentioned, we're going to get our value for A and get our value for B. I know I mentioned that many times. But for our variable value A, we want to get the number that's in input A. Notice how the name of this input is called input A. You know, if I press run, I can put a number in here, and I can put a number in here. And what we want to do is take this input A, and we want to get the number that's in input A. And right here, this does a great job of doing that. This will give you the exact number that's in input A. And notice how it's still on ID. We need the ID to be input A because the ID of this is input A. So we press this dropdown, we find input A, and we click it. Now we're going to store A as input A. And before we take any steps further, let's put a print command here just to make sure this is working. Console.log, and we're just going to throw in A. Awesome. So now it's going to log the variable for A, and that's going to come down right here in our debug console. So when we press calculate, when the calculate button is clicked, it's going to run this function. It's going to create a variable A, and that variable A is going to be the number that's in input A, and input A is right here. And then it's going to log A to the debug console. So let's just test this out to make sure we're going to see A down here. When we press run, if I put in a value for A, let's just say I put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I press calculate, down here, it prints out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Awesome. That means it's going to get the value from A from this text box. If I change the value of A to 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, press calculate, it's going to print the value of A. Awesome. So we know it's working. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, but for B. So we're going to define a variable here. We're going to call it B, and we're going to get the number from B. So we're going to come here to UI controls from up here, scroll down until we find get number, drag this get number here, and change this to input B. Awesome. Now we have A and we have B, and we know it's going to work because it worked up here. And notice it says B, A and B is defined, but it's not called in your program because we're getting A, but we're not using A. We need to use A. So we're going to define another variable here called C. And we're going to get C by calling this function and giving it A and B. So we're going to get this. We're going to call the function. This is how you call the function. This is how you write the function. Notice how when I hover over it, it says define a function, and this one says call a function. To call a function is to use that function and hopefully get a result from it or ask it to do something. To define a function is when you want to write the function like we did earlier. So let's call the function. We're going to grab and drag and drop this, my function here. We're going to rename this function, or we're going to rename this to the function up here. It's called calculate, so we're going to put calculate right here. And we need to give it A and B. So we're going to change the first parameter to A. We're going to make space for a second one and change the second one to B. And we defined A and B because A is here and B is here. Now we're using A and B and that error is gone. but we have a new error. C is defined, but it's not called in your program. And that's correct because we're going to get the value for C, but it's not going to do anything with it. It hasn't done anything with it yet. We need to put that value for C up here in the output C. That's the whole goal here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to UI controls and scroll down until we find set text. Set text is right here. And you notice the description says set text for the specified element. Each one of these individual things is an element. So this set text is going to set the text for the element that we tell it to set the text for. And we're going to tell it to set the text for output underscore C, because output underscore C is this number right here. So we're going to change it to output underscore C. But we don't want to change the text to text. We want to change the text to C. Awesome. So now when we press calculate, it's going to take our value for A here, take our value for B. It's going to calculate a value for C, and then it's going to set the text on output C to C. Now, I went through all of that. I know it was a little quick, but there is a big mistake that I made. Does anybody know the mistake that I made in terms of the organization? Any ideas?
Are they back? No, I was gonna say backwards. Like. in
Oh no,
opposite order.
it's totally fine. And I'm glad you brought that up. Sorry, I'm gonna pick on you a bit because you're incorrect. But we do need the calculate function to be above this. Because if you notice the lines are numbered here, it's gonna go in the order of the lines. And if the calculate function is below this function, by the time it gets to this, it's not gonna know that this function even exists. Because it doesn't know it exists because it's gonna be below it. That's why we have the on event below it. I notice there's a few chat messages here. I'm pretty sure the function will work. I'm glad you guys noticed that. But what I was actually looking for was the comments. I didn't comment my code. I told you guys all of that stuff about commenting your code, but I didn't do it myself. So let's throw in a few comments here just to make sure we know what this code is going to do. So what is this code going to do? Does anyone want to have an idea of what we should describe this code, how we should describe what this code is going to do?
It's just basically getting the number from the text box A and B,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
then it's gonna be display the output using the variable C on the text box C.
Awesome. That's perfect. Awesome. So I'm going to put that make that a little bit shorter. Essentially, we're getting the value for A and B from input A and input B. And I'm going to put another comment here so it's a little bit nicer. And then changing the value of output C to C. Oh, I need one more comment here for calling the function calculate with A and B. Awesome. And this looks good. And now we have the comments, we have the code, we have the function. Now let's make sure this works. It's a moment of truth. Nothing bad so far. Now let's put in some values for A and a value for B. Anybody throw a number out there between 1 and 100?
$15.
Awesome. 15. Another one. Let's go.
20.
Let's go. Okay, awesome. 15 and 20. Now, 15 and 20 is not going to give you an exact integer. Actually, wait. No, it's not. Wait, am I crazy? No, it is. No. Well, let's first calculate. It does. Never mind. I'm crazy. Okay. And clearly it worked because 15, 20, 25, I was being silly, is technically a Pythagorean identity. It is 3, 4, and 5, like I mentioned earlier, but each thing is just multiplied by 5. So you guys were pretty lucky. You actually chose a Pythagorean identity as the two numbers, which is pretty funny. And clearly when we pressed calculate, it worked. And you know, if I come here and I want to change this to 100 and maybe change this to 200, it's going to calculate, but it's going to give me a little bit of a weird value because this is not a Pythagorean identity. This is just going to give me a value of what it would be if this was a right triangle with side A and side B as 100 and 200 respectively. Awesome. Now we have one more thing to do, and that's to get to our help frame. And this is the easiest part because we just have to switch frames when we press this button. And then we need to change this button to make it switch to the other frame. Okay. And we notice here that our help button is disappearing for some reason. And let's see why that's happening. Quick debug. Okay, I'm not sure why. What if I just put another button here? Okay, the help button is broken. That's my only solution to that. I'm gonna just. Okay, this help button is broken. I'm gonna destroy it. Sorry about that. And I'm gonna call this help again. And it disappears, help 2. And it's there. Okay. We set the ID to help 2. For some reason, it wasn't working with just help. But we have our help button. And if you recall, our help button needs to take us to help screen. And then our back button needs to take us to main. So let's do the help button first. We're going to do another event. We're going to go to UI controls and we're going to do an on event. And we're going to just throw it right here, right below this. And we're going to write some comments as to what this is actually going to do before we actually do it. I'm going to say this button will take you to the help screen. Now, if we hover over this, notice that the ID of this button is help 2 because we had to change it for some reason. And if we come here, we have a help 2 right here. And if you press help 2, and it is already going to click, it's going to run this function, just like we did here. When calculate is clicked, it's going to do this function, which we had earlier. Now, when help 2 is clicked, it's going to run this function. And we already said here, this button will take you to the help screen. We're on the main screen right now, and we need to switch to this screen called help screen. And this help screen is what we created earlier with that explains the Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to come here. And we're going to scroll all the way down to set screen. And we're going to drag and drop set screen right here. And it's going to change the screen. And notice we're already on main right now. We need to change it to help screen. So we're going to change the screen that it's setting it to help screen. So now if we press run and we press help, it changed to the help screen, which is awesome. But if we try to press back, we can't get back because we didn't make an event for the back button. Now, making the event for the back button is the exact same process as making the event for this button. So we're going to come back up here, another on event, drag it right here. And notice the ID of this button is called back. So we're going to go to this drop down, and we're going to find back. On click, it's going to do a function. And then I'm going to write a comment here. This button will take you back to the main screen. Okay. Now, what code do I place below this so I can set it back to the main screen? Anyone know? Hint, it's almost the exact same code as this. Exactly. Set screen. Thank you.
Green.
Yes, set screen. Awesome. You guys are getting it. That's awesome. We're gonna go and grab the set screen and put it down here. But we need to change it. And like we've been saying, we need to change it to the main screen. Like this. So now if we go back to our main screen and we press run, we press help, and we press back, now we can switch between the screens. And that's pretty much all we needed to create. If we look back here at our sketchpad, I think we accomplished everything that we wanted to do. We wanted to have an input for A and B, have a calculate button that takes A and B and runs this calculation to give us a value for C. And then it's going to output the value for C up here. And then we wanted a help button, which when you pressed it, it would come back to this new screen that explained what the Pythagorean theorem was, and then had a picture of it. And then it had a button that takes you back. We did all of that. Awesome. So we pretty much finished our app.